Can you hear me loud and clear? But not too loud and clear, is that all right? Good. Well, thank you very much for coming out this morning and finding the new venue. That was the first initiative test. Just start with a quotation from Lawrence Binion at the beginning of the First World War. These lines have been used many, many times. They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. But in the course of the next hour, you'll see what 30 years of walking did to condemn and grow old a number of us on this hike. So, I'm going to try to convey the beauty of this extraordinary, and I would really say unique stretch of coastline, particularly the landscape I want to talk about. But I will also make some references to the literary associations along the way, some of the history, the buildings and places that have taken place there, and we'll have a look at some of the really pretty, beautiful little villages and towns along this stretch of coast. Just to give you some context, this is the Southwest Coast Path. The books nearly always are written from Minehead, and they go round to Poole. But because I lived in the New Forest, I actually started it the other way round. So these are there was no internet in those days. There were no cell phones in those days. We had books and maps and things we had to carry around with us. These are the two that covered the stretch I'm going to talk about today. It's impossible for me to cover all of this in one talk, so we're just doing a part one, and we're going to cover this area from Poole down to Land's End. So just a bit of context, in fact. It was opened as a national trail in 1978. Quite an achievement to put this together. It's on private land, public land, the Duchy of Cornwall, which is now King Charles, but it was Prince Charles's land. And these owners all had to get together. They all had to agree permission, because the path hugs the coastline for almost this entire 1,014 kilometers. It's a tremendous pathway. You climb about 4 times as high as Everest, and somebody I know from Cape Town who's just gone over and has done half of it, rather jokingly said in his daily blog, I got to the highest point on the path yesterday. It was 310 meters. But 2 days later, his blog was saying, what goes up has to come down and go up and come down and go up. So it may not be very high, but there's a lot of ups and downs. There are a fabulous range of variety of wildlife and plants on there. The landscape changes every single day. The geology keeps changing, so the landscape changes, and with that are the plants, the bird life, everything else. And I'll make some references to some of these along the way. So I started it in 1984. The very reason that was it was my 30th birthday, and I had no intention of spending it in the office and people telling me I'd just joined the over 30s club. So I thought I'll walk away from this quite literally. So I decided I would walk the Dorset Coast Path, and I did that week, and it became what I now refer to as a 30-year love affair. I just went back every single year for 1 week. The first year I did it was in August, when my birthday was, but after that, as other friends decided this was not a bad idea and joined me, we went for the 21st of June because it's the longest day of the year, and the schools haven't broken up. So it was relatively quiet, particularly at that time. You could get accommodation easily, you could get meals in pubs easily. It was just a whole lot better. So I had anything up to 5 people traveling with me, usually only 1 or 2. And my final 4 years, I did it on my own. Here's some of the characters. This particular chap, Jeremy, came along on the first year, walked Dorset, said, I've walked Dorset, and he never came back. We remain friends to this day, but he devoted his life to making a lot of money, which he did extremely successfully. This other character here became known as Buffalo Bob because we bumped into him on the very first morning of the very first day as we started the hike. And he took a photograph of us. We said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm walking down the Dorset coast." And he'd come from Buffalo in the United States. So we walked the whole week together, met up again the following year, and he came over about 17 times out of the 30 and became a lifelong friend. On the left here, Dr. Andrew Love, who was at university with me. He's a doctor of geology. So when he wasn't traveling all various parts of the world, he also joined me for quite a few of the hikes. That is Buff Bob again. You may think he looks a bit like Lee Marvin. He actually sounded like Lee Marvin as well. And on more than one occasion in pubs in the evening, people would come up to us and say, "You're not walking with Lee Marvin, are you?" Steve, the other character here, he also joined me for quite a few of the years. You'll find that beer is a recurring theme through this. There are a lot of pubs and a lot of beer consumed along the way. So the first stretch I'm going to talk about this morning is from Poole Harbour, which is either the beginning or the end of the walk, whichever way you want to think about it, to Lyme Regis, famous old town. It just takes you out of Dorset onto to the Devon border. So that's the first 138 kilometres. Daunting enough, as you might think. And then you think, well, actually, out of over 1,000 kilometres, we've really made a start on it. So as you leave, we go into an area of chalkland. These are known as Old Harry and his wife, and into Chapman's Pool. This is effectively the start of the Jurassic Coast. Now, the Jurassic Coast runs for about 150 kilometres. It's a World Heritage Site. The geology is from about 80 to 250 million years ago, from the Mesozoic, Triassic, Jurassic, and early Cretaceous period. There's a lot of erosion on that coast, and fossils just keep falling out. You can literally walk along the beach, pick up a stone, and there'll be a fossil in it. They've picked up a lot of dinosaur remains and pieced these things together, whole dinosaurs. It's often referred to as the dinosaur coast. This is really one of the early parts of it, is Chapman's Pool. In just close to this, at Lulworth, there was an area called it was known as the Burning Cliffs. Back in about 1830, the porites in the rocks was deteriorating fast enough that it ignited the bituminous shales in the rocks. And they burned for several years. They just smoked and smoked away. And there is the largest onshore oil refinery or pumping just on the cliffs just near there. There's some really quite dramatic geology in this area. This is called the Lulworth Crumple. And Durdle Door, which is probably one of the most photographed of the features along the Dorset coast. I don't know whether many of you are Thomas Hardy fans, but this is Hardy's Essex. So when you look inland, you can see the valleys, the little villages and things. Well, this is what Thomas Hardy was writing about. Now, this gives you some idea of what the landscape is like, because the Dorset stretch is particularly rolling. So it's very beautiful, very isolated, but you can see the path here. And what goes up, goes down, and goes up again. This area inland was requisitioned, this part just close to here was requisitioned by the Army in 1943. And there was a village there called Tyneham, where the local population had to be evacuated. So the Army wanted to use this for range firing, for training, and so on. and they never gave it back. The villagers had to be relocated, they never got back. A lot of the time there is no coastal access. They open it up for a few weeks in the summer, but they open it up every weekend, so they agree that they won't fire any tanks or ammunition at you during the weekend. So you have to plan your hike a little bit in those areas to make sure that you can get through. You can see up here this figure on a horse that's etched into the chalk on the hillside. That's a relatively recent one. That was George III in 1808. But there are some much older ones. Now, I'm going to give you due warning of this, because the most famous is the Cernabas giant, above the village of Cernabas. If you're going to be offended by a very masculine figure from the late Saxon period, is about 50 meters high, now is the time to look away. Don't want complaints afterwards. He stands proud on the hillside above Cernabas. And on one occasion, when our friend Steve wasn't walking with us, we decided that you can buy postcards. You can get lots and lots of places sell postcards of the Cernabas giant. So we decided, well, we'd buy one and we'd send it to Steve, who was at that time had gone back to living at home. So we simply said, Steve, this reminded me so much of you, love Monique. His mother really wanted to know who Monique was. And this interesting area is called the Fleet. On one side, you've got Chesil Beach, and that stretches for, I think it's 29 kilometers. Yeah, 29 kilometers. It gets up to 50 meters high, and the water on this side is brackish. It's a mixture of fresh and salt water. The sea has effectively graded it, so you've got at one end boulders or rocks that are about potato size, and at the other end there's the size of peas. It's called the Fleet, and about halfway along is a village called Moonfleet. So I don't know whether anybody who might know the word Moonfleet might mean something. Faulkner's novel. It's a fabulous book. It's a book every schoolboy should read. It's about smugglers in the age of the great smuggling times. And he recalls at one stage a big storm that came over here, went up to the village, and the coffins were moving around in the church underneath. So there is indeed a lovely little church in the village of Moonfleet. Again, looking back, this goes out to the Isle of Portland Bill as it's known, and you can already begin to see some changes in the kind of colour of the rock, the colour of the sand on the beaches, and the pathway following along the edge of the coast again. That's a wonderful view from towards the end of this stretch of Dorset. I'm looking from Lyme Regis, and the high point here, which is the highest on that stretch, is called Golden Cap. But you can see this wonderful kind of roller coaster of hills. And that takes you to Lyme Regis Harbour. And I'm standing on a place called the Cobb, which you can remember back some years ago, 1981, there was a famous film called The French Lieutenant's Woman, and that was based in Lyme Regis, and the Cobb featured very strongly in that. It's been a harbour since medieval times, so it's really quite a famous old town. And the town's full of little tiny narrow streets and pubs and shops and things. It's a beautiful mixture. Unfortunately, incredibly busy during the summertime. It's definitely not a place to go into in July and August. And that was at the point where my friend Jeremy said, "Okay, that's it. I've done my Dorset bit now. I'm finished for the next 30 years." It's just me, a younger me, and at the end of the Cobb. So the next stretch then that takes us right the way down through Devon, and in fact it takes us really to the Cornish border. is all of South Devon from Lyme Regis down to Plymouth. A little bit longer than the Dorset stretch. So again, you're getting a very different type of rock and geology here. And I'll show you a couple of pictures of big landslips. Actually, I should mention, on that last stretch, going through Dorset, was the biggest landslip on the British mainland. And it was so big that they went and harvested the crop on there for Christmas. It had slipped itself away, but there was so much grain there that they actually went out and harvested what was left. It was a mass. And almost every few months, there's another report of the cliffs crumbling away. And the path, of course, generally has to be relocated at that stage. This is the delightful little village of Branscombe, which we used to try to make sure that we stayed in. It was so picturesque. And this church is a Norman church, St. Winifred's. And like so many of these, they're open. So you could just wander in and enjoy the peace and the quiet. It's got a Norman font in there. It's a beautiful little setting, as you can see, with the village on one side and the hill on the other, and the sea is just the other side of there. The path comes up into the village, walks its way through, and then joins back up further up. On this one particular day that we were walking through, we were lucky enough to see what I still regard as one of the best weddings I've ever seen in my life. There they were, set it up on the beach, the reception. There was a jazz group playing, there was music, there were people sitting on bales of hay, the kids were eating ice creams, they're drinking cider and beer. I mean, it was the happiest looking wedding I've ever seen. They were at least very lucky with the weather. And we were quite tempted to just merge in and stay there with them for the rest of the day. But this is a little bit further on, and we're looking down now towards Sidmouth and Salcombe Mouth again. Very, very high point here, and it drops down into this little town of Salcombe. Gives you some idea of the hike. There might not be mountains, but when we were carrying about 8 kilograms. We stayed in guest houses every night, went to the pub for dinner. They gave us good breakfast. We got on with the hiking, so it wasn't like we were rough camping or anything like that. But it was, and generally we were hiking about 24 kilometers a day. We had 1 or 2 days on there where we had to hike about 36 kilometers, but a short day might have been something more like 18 or 19. So generally, quite a bit of tough hiking. And this takes us out of Teignmouth, which is just tucked in here. There's a nice estuary there. And on one particular day when I did this, it proved to be the hottest day of the year. I don't know whether it was there, but certainly in parts of the country it was 32 degrees. And we, unfortunately, didn't take enough fluid with us that day. And it's a real, again, roller coaster getting through that area. Fortunately, something came to our help in the form of this place called the Thatched Tavern. And we fell into there in some pretty sorry state, I have to say. 2 of us had a couple of double Perriers at the bar and drank a pint of Guinness while we were pouring the beers for the other guys in the garden. And that was followed by 2 more pints of Guinness before we decided it was worth walking on again. It was a very, very hot day. Now there's an example of the kind of cliff erosion that took place. This is by no means isolated, but what you can also see, there's a building what's left at the top of there. So I think if you own property anywhere along that stretch within here to the back of the hall, you'd better start watching, because it's going to keep getting closer and closer to you. Whether you can get insurance or not, I don't know. And of course, you've also got at the beach here all these little kind of beach huts, cafes and so on, which are somewhat vulnerable, as you can see how close that was to this little area. this is Dartmouth in the evening. I'm not sure how familiar you'll be with Dartmouth, but it is the home of the Royal Navy training in the UK. They have a lovely naval training centre there. Beautiful place for youngsters to go and do their training. That's on the edge of the town, but the town itself is right on this river estuary, the Dart, with Salka, with another little place on the other side, and the main town. And the ferries go back and forth right the way through till nearly midnight. I spent many New Year's Eves there, and even on New Year's Eve, the ferry was running till midnight. That's looking across at Dartmouth. The Naval College is up on the hill over here. Lovely little kind of congested bit along the seafront. And looking back in the evening across to Kingswear, and the sailing ship, the Tenacious, which just happened to be moored up while we were there. There are a few of these, 2 or 3 of these sailing ships, quite often used for people with disabilities. They get them the opportunity to go to sea for a few days, and able-bodied people with a skilled crew help on the ship, learn some seafaring skills themselves, and they go round that southwest coast and sometimes even across to France. Now, if you were to go up the estuary, I don't know whether I've got one going up the estuary from there. No. If you were to go up the estuary from there, you'd find yourself at a lovely little place, a lovely building called Greenways. Greenways was the home of Agatha Christie, and she wrote nearly all of her novels there. It's now part of the National Trust, so you can go round for a small fee, or maybe not so small these days. But it's a beautiful little house, and you can easily see why she could lose herself in writing all her writing there. It's one of these places it's a big house, but it's not like a mansion, you know, it's a manageable sort of place. And she even had a dipping swimming pool in the river, so you could go down the garden into this pool and swim in a confined area in the Dart River. And I'll mention Agatha Christie again shortly. First place you come to out of Dartmouth, it's one of the few places you actually can't walk all the way along the coast. That parts of this you can't get through, so you have to take some paths and roads inland, and then you drop down here to a place called Slapton Sands. This is famous because it was used for training for the D-Day landings. And there is actually a tank that they retrieved from the water that somebody has restored, and it's up with a book about the Slapton Sands. But the sad thing about this was, while they were training, a radio signal was picked up by a German ship, Swift boats, off the coast. The Swift boats moved in, sank several of the landing craft, and killed 700 people. Nothing, of course, was said about it at the time, because we were just about to do the D-Day landings, and the last thing they needed was any kind of demoralization of the population. So the whole thing was kept quiet. The local population had been evacuated, so the only people who knew about it were the people involved there at the training, who just lost 700 of their colleagues. So it was, I think, only actually released when the rule that says you have to release public documents and secrets after 40 years, it became public, the scale of this tragedy. And then as you come out of Slapton Sands, you're walking past a couple of little places called B Sands, and looking out to outer Forward Head. Nearly all of these places have either lighthouses or daylights, like a striped monument to act as a marker for shipping. In fact, it was out at this one, or Start Point, I think, we were talking to a chap with his son. Rather unusual, I suppose. This guy happened to be a smoker. He had his 16-year-old son with him. Anyway, he was prepared to tell us that the previous day he'd just finished his last cigarette in this. So he threw the packet of cigarettes off the packet off the coast. Only as it travelled downwards, he remembered that he'd put all his folding money for the week in the packet of cigarettes. So if that didn't cure him of smoking, I don't know what did. Oh yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. That's where we're now looking out at start point. Yeah. And this lovely area is Gammon Head, short of Salcombe. All of this little, I don't know why, but all of these things around here, they're called things like Pig's Nose and Ham Point and Gammon Point and Gammon Head. But I don't know what the pigs had to do with that area, but as you can see, very pretty and providing a lovely shelter. So you've got this little boat that just pulled in here, gets busier in the summertime. People swim and fish off there, but it's generally peaceful. But you just go around into this other town of Salcombe, which is, in a sense, is a bit like Dartmouth. It's on this beautiful river estuary. But Salcombe, I would say, is a yachty's place. Very, very expensive, a bit more exclusive, and not really so much of a working town, but nevertheless, very pretty. And then we're going out now further down the coast towards Thurleston. Again, you can see the change in the scenery and the geology. It's flattened out quite a lot here, this lovely beach. And the next main feature is looking across at this Burr Island. We'll come up close to this in just a second, and I'll give you a little bit as a background, the history of this. That's it at night. This is the hotel, and this little place here is the pub, which is called the Pilchard Inn. It dates from 1330, and you can cross over at low tide. So when we would go over and have drinks in the Pilchard at night, you can't get into the hotel. It's a very expensive, beautifully preserved Art Deco hotel. Agatha Christie wrote 2 Poirot novels there. They did a full restoration on the place. It's astronomically expensive, and they don't like scruffy hikers walking up to the bar. So they make it quite clear: if you don't have a booking, don't think about coming in. Just go to the pub. You can just make out this strange-looking contraption here. It's called a sea tractor. It has a platform of about 3 meters high, and tires like 2 meters high. Well, when the tide comes in, all this lot is well and truly covered. And if you want to get out there, or more importantly, get back to the mainland, you have to get on this top platform of the sea tractor. And the guy had, one night we came back in the darkness, about 11:30 at night, into the blackness of the waves, 2-3 meters high, with this guy trying to steer this thing through. And all of the top deck, we had people in evening dress who'd been to a special function at the hotel, with black ties, evening gowns and everything. It's quite the most surreal experience. And on the top of this is quite a prominent little place. You can walk around the island. The hewer used to stand there. Now, a hewer was used to go out and have a look at where the mackerel shoals and the sardine, more importantly, the sardines were coming in, because you could spot these in the water around there. And the hewer would then signal to people the fishermen on shore, and they would know where to go out to row out to with their nets. So that's quite a prominent place on the island. This is, I would say one of the most beautiful places I ever went to on this whole southwest coast. It's not dramatic, but this particular estuary, and it's called the River most people would never have heard of it. You'll only find it if you're walking there, really. There's a little track that will take cars down to there. You have to then turn around and go back up. But the land around has been owned by the same family for several hundred years, and it's just been left unspoilt. So there's no agricultural development or anything. The water is pristinely clean. The only problem you have, how on earth do you get across? So again, you have to think about when are the tides going to be for the days that you're walking, because at low tide, you can get across at about knee high. At high tide, it's ceiling high. So the last time I did it, there was no way to find the low tide. And the route round is 12 kilometers. Well, you don't have time to do an extra 12 kilometers on that day. So, I was sort of thinking, what are we going to do now then? And fortunately, some guys came down the river in a fishing boat, little fishing boat. So, like a demented man, I stood on the side as though there was a crisis of my life. And they came over and said, well, do you need some help? I said, could you take me across? So 2 minutes later, I was on the other side. And I said, I hope you have the best day's fishing of your life. You've just saved me hours. But it truly is beautiful. This is going into a town called Nosmea. We're getting quite close to Plymouth at this point. It's about a day's hike away from there. Again, quite a popular yachting area. That's what it looks like at night. A couple of lovely pubs down on the estuary as well. Essential, of course. I mean, we never stay anywhere where there wasn't a pub. And that then takes us into Cornwall, from Plymouth to Land's End, which is longer again than the stretch, either the Dorset or the Devon stretch. I stayed in this farmhouse, beautiful little place here, little stone farmhouse. They allowed us to park our cars there as well. This was another tricky bit, of course, as we began to work our way around there. How do you get there? Sometimes you could do it by public transport, but sometimes we had to take the cars down. So we would always be trying to find somebody who would let us leave our cars there for a week, and then one way or another we'd have to find a way of getting back, which usually some combination of buses and trains and whatever we could do that. The two little villages down here are called Kingsand and Corsand, and that used to be the Devon-Cornwall border. And rumour has it that on a Saturday night they'd all get drunk and they'd all fight each other because, well, you are Cornish and you're Danish and we don't like you. Devonshire, so we don't like you. They moved the border to Plymouth and everything was peaceful again after that. That takes us out into the wilds of, out to Rame Head. And the two twin fishing towns of East and West Looe. This is looking out at West Looe at night. Both very pretty little places, lovely old streets and pubs. Used to be able to go out shark fishing from there, but I don't suppose they do that these days because the sharks are so much more protected than they used to be. You can see now it's the full kind of summer glory of all these beautiful ferns as we're heading round it. This is Talland and Port Hollow. You see, I said that we would see some of these lovely little villages that are just nestled amongst the cliffs. But the next important one is Polperro. Look how well guarded the harbour is here. The ships sneak their way in here. It's very tidal. All of these areas will have tides that are probably 8 to 10 meters high. So that's the difference vertical difference between the low and the high tide every day. And my friend Steve, who's eagerly anticipating two of the things he loves most in life, a Cornish pasty and lots of beer. we were just about to go in there and find this little pub on the harbour. Polperro is also one of the very popular Cornish places, impossible to get into in summer, and you can't take a car down there. The cars have to be parked up outside the town. I'm just working my way down the coast. You can see again here the path just creeping its way around the very edge of the cliffs. And at the end of June, quite typically you could walk for 2 hours and you wouldn't see anybody at all. I don't suppose even in August it's that busy. It's, once you've got a couple of kilometres outside any of the towns, you're largely on your own. Occasionally we've seen people who were walking the entire path in one go, much more adventurous, and also wild camping for some of them as well. This is Great Atlantic and Little Atlantic beaches, and you can see again a few ships, a few little boats pulled into the harbour, into the shelter, and the path again just winding its way around over this cliff. So you've constantly got these stunning views. And we're looking now across at Polruan, and going into Foy, town of Foy. Foy was, for a long time, was well known for being the outport for kaolin, China clay. There are big China clay mines just inland from there, and some quite significant boats managed to get up that estuary and get loaded and then come past Foy. Foy now is much more of a kind of twee little town, and very close to there is the Eden Project. If any of you get the chance ever to go to Cornwall, the Eden Project, I think, is like one of the wonders of the world, where they've converted this old disused quarry, and there are big geodesic domes with different climates in them, and as well as beautiful gardens. It's quite subtropical down there, but people say, how can you do this? There's nobody lives down here. It brings in incredible income and tourism to the Cornish area, and inspired somebody else and them to then create the Lost Gardens of Heligan very close by as well. So people will go down and make a few days of being able to go and see some of these beautiful places. We never really, to be fair, we never really diverted ourselves while we were hiking. We stuck to the coast and got on with it. We were on a bit of a mission, I suppose. Oh yeah, back to beer again. Here he is in Seventh Heaven, in the Galleon pub in Foy. And then as you leave, you can see how the climate's beginning to affect the vegetation. It's beginning to look a bit more subtropical. These sort of palm trees, and it gets more so. We get to a point where there's almost no frost even in the winter time. Now this, you might say this is a rather nondescript beach. It's quite pretty. It's just outside Foy. Well, I was standing there one day when a lady walked by and she grabbed me by the arm. She said, "This is it. This is where it happened. This is where Rebecca drowned. Daphne du Maurier is Rebecca. This is Menebilly, for those who've read any Daphne du Maurier, and this is where she drowned. And the house Menebilly is just inland from there. And she was a great Daphne du Maurier fan. And her poor hapless husband was being dragged all over Cornwall, visiting every one of these sites that she could find and being told about what had happened there." Just in case you think it's always like this, blue skies, calm, lovely. There was one year where we decided there's something called the Saints' Way, and you can do a little bit on one coast, the coast we've just been walking down, and at Foy, go right across the peninsula and come out near Padstow on the other side. And we decided we would do that. It's 2 days or so of walking across, and then go up the north side. The Saints used to come over from Ireland, and the drovers, and to save them having to go all the way around Land's End, they created this trail called the Saints' Way across the peninsula. And there are lots of things there are monuments, and there are places called, in these days, Holywell, but they were holy wells in years gone by. Well, we left for you in some pretty atrocious weather, and this photograph was taken pretty much on the 21st of June on the moor. It was 10 degrees, it was lashing with rain, the wind was blowing at about 40 miles an hour. It didn't stop doing it all day. We were walking up to our knees in water at one stage, and when we got to the guest house, the lady said, "We have an asylum for people like you." But fortunately, we didn't have too many days like that. So a bit further along the coast, we are en route to Portloo, and then this lovely little place, Portloo. There's a hotel right on the edge here, a little pub further up there. So, and you can see the path comes in here and goes back out on that side. Beautiful, sheltered little spot. We didn't used to be able to get much further than that. We got down to a place called Putscastle, which is the next town. And then for many, many years, the little peninsula that took you right down to the end opposite Falmouth, we couldn't take because there was no ferry operating that would get us back over to St. Maur's. And then after quite a number of years, somebody started this ferry up again. So we were able to get a bit further down. I'm at a place called St. Anthony in Menage there. And then this is the Lord of the Manor's little modest place alongside the river at Place. And just behind me is where the ferry went out. I was sitting on the jetty one day, waiting for this little boat to come in, and there was a shoal of baby seahorses in the crystal clear water. Never seen them before in my life, never seen them since. In fact, another sight that I'd never seen before was back on that beautiful estuary I was talking about, the River the unspoiled estuary. We were walking back through the little lanes, and there were fireflies just dancing in the darkness. Now, again, I've never seen that in any country before. Now, significant pub this, Steve in Happiness again, but the pub dates from 1660, and this wonderful guy behind here, who goes under the name of, get this right, he's the Reverend Barrington Bennett. Now, not only was he the landlord of the pub for over 50 years, but he was the only serving Anglican minister who was also a publican. People have left the church and become publicans, or left the publican business and got ordained. But this guy had a local parish and still ran the pub for 50 years. And apparently, when he died, Truro Cathedral was standing room only. He was such a popular man in the area. What I particularly liked as well about this pub was his aversion to mobile phones. When he says no mobile phones, he nails them to the mast. He really meant it. I thoroughly approved. So once we get away from Falmouth, we've got a couple of other estuaries to cross before we get down towards the Lizard. There are regular ferries on most of them, like across here from Helford. But this next one didn't have. You had to call up, if it was high tide, you had to call up somebody who would take you across. At low tide, you could get across on some stepping stones. I only actually timed it once to be able to do that. And as we were crossing, the tide was coming in, and the sea trout were coming in on the tide. The water was only about this deep, but there were some beautiful sea trout like this, like coming in like submarines on the tide. It was really quite a sight. Another one of these lovely little villages. This one is Port Houstock, and probably famous for the fact it's halfway around the whole path. There's a plaque there that tells you you've now reached your halfway point. But one thorn amongst the roses here, my friend Steve once again. And then the next place, before we get to Cadgwith, is Coverack and Coverack Harbour, a beautiful little natural harbour. So it curls around so much that in the evening you can sit down there and you can watch the setting sun in the northwest of the sky. So the sun has kind of circled its way right the way around there, and pick up fish and chips here, or go to the pub here and take them out onto the harbour. But another interesting place just above here, as we're going out, in the middle of the farmers' fields, are these beautiful sculptures. I don't know whether I've got more than one of them. Yeah, it's a sad and a happy tale, actually. A guy called Terence Coventry carved these. He grew up, went to college, he went to an art school, and he said to his father, "Yeah, I would like to be a sculptor." And his father said, "No, you're a pig farmer." So for the rest of his life, he was a pig farmer until his father died, and he went back to being a sculptor. And his first exhibition was at the age of 61. And now his sculptures have been sold all over the world. They're exhibited in all kinds of places. There's a shop that sells, or a place that exhibits and sells them. So his latter years of his life, he actually became a very famous sculptor. I think he died in his late 70s. So he had about 20 years where he really was able to follow his true calling. And these are the fields that they owned, and sculptures were just lying around in there. I mean, they would have been very valuable. And it takes you to what is probably my favourite of all the Cornish fishing coves, Cadgwith Cove. And this is the Cadgwith Cove Inn, which we used to try to stay at if we could. An important thing was to arrive there and stay there on a Friday night. In the bar, this is a little harbour. The fishing boats got pulled up the beach there. They did gig racing as well. These are like the big rowing boats, and they would do race out into the harbour. Female teams as well as male teams. But this is Buffalo Bob again. He brought one of his sons along one year for the hike. Another year he brought his grandson, his 13-year-old grandson, who subsequently became an Olympic skier. But in the bar, you see these little ropes hanging from the beams. The fishermen would gather on a Friday night, fishermen and the farmers, a little group of them, and sing in harmony, no musical instruments. And they'd sing Cornish sea shanties and all sorts of folk songs and everything. And they'd put their hand on there and they would slap the beams. But on lovely warm nights, they'd go out and sing at the moon. They'd stand at the end of the beach and just sing in harmony. It was quite the most amazing thing that all the local people always came in on a Friday night, especially for that. There was no such thing as closing time on Friday night. It's far too isolated. There are no police anywhere nearby. So forget the idea of closing the bar at 11 o'clock. They close the bar when they felt like closing the bar. So this is the Lizard, a lizard point. You can see why it's called the Lizard by this shape. If people are asked in the UK, where's the most southerly point in England, I would tell you that 9 out of 10 of them will tell you it's Land's End. But it isn't, it's the Lizard. If you think back to the map I showed at the beginning, you can see how obvious it is that it's the Lizard. The Land's End is the most western point, but the Lizard is the most southerly point. It's an interesting place not only for that, but it's an interesting mix of geology. There's something called serpentine, it's a very green rock there. And it's the first place in the country, shows you how climate change has brought these things about, that I saw the very first signs in the UK of what we would know as the ice plant, but I think you in South Africa would know as the sour fig. And maybe it was brought by a bird across the Atlantic or from Europe. It started to grow along the sides of the lizard. And over the years, as I went back, it spread and spread and spread. So it's become, and went to other areas as well. This is Mullion Cove, again, another well-sheltered cove, and the Mullion Cove Hotel. One of those places that really felt like so many of these beautifully built places from years and years ago. And then people started to go abroad for their holidays. The weather wasn't always good in the UK, and these places just kind of fell into disrepair. But then things like the Eden Project and Lost Gardens of Helligan and a few other things came into Cornwall, and these hotels started to revive because they could. It wasn't a case of a summer trade of July and August. They could get people to come down here at other times of the year, and they would pay good money for it. So you could go down there and have a murder mystery weekend, an Agatha Christie murder mystery weekend, and gourmet weekends. The nice thing about it was we scruffy hikers wandered into the bar one day, never sure whether we'd be welcome or not. Hey, come on in, you know. What would you like? Would you like some, you know, some complimentary nuts and things as well? So you should never judge a book by its cover, because my friend Steve took his wife back there for several New Year's Eves at considerable cost, like, you know, £1,000 for 2 days. So they got their monies back from us. This is just the harbour again at Mullion Island, and this is one of the most photographed places. It's not actually a church anymore now. There's a museum in there, but it's right on the harbour at Portreath. On one in fact, the only day we ever had to abandon the hike. It was like this the day we arrived. The storm came in during the night, and the waves were going over the top of the church, and they were going right up the cliffs. The spray was going right up the cliffs. So we got to about here, and Buffalo Bob said, "We're getting to a huddle here. We know we can do this. We know we can, but we don't have to. So we're going to take a secret vote on this now. You hold up one finger if you want to carry on, and 2 fingers if you don't." We voted to get the bus to Cadgwith Cove that day, and by the evening the storm had gone, and it was back to calm again. But a lovely little place, and I wrote a little article about my time hiking this, and I said that was probably one of the most improved little towns in Cornwall. Actually, it's come on a lot. Very famous. You'd be forgiven for thinking this is Le Mont Saint-Michel in France, but it's St. Michael's Mount in the harbour at Penzance, or in that bay at Penzance. It's lived in by a very wealthy family, and it has a custodian. You can go over by foot at low tide, or you can go over by ferry when the tide is in. And obviously it's a very prominent landmark. I haven't got any photographs of Penzance, although I must say I do like Penzance. But this is Lamorna Cove as we are leaving Penzance, and shortly thereafter you reach what they claim is the kindest and mildest climate on the British mainland, a little place called St. Loy, where there's almost no frost and all the vegetation looks subtropical. And pretty much once you leave that area, Lamorna and Mousel, you've got to walk all the way through to Sennin Cove and Land's End. Mousel, incidentally, which I've just left before this, was famous for the fact for a terrible lifeboat disaster. I'm sure this made international headlines back in 1981. The entire voluntary crew of the lifeboat at Mousel was lost, all 8 people. And there were multi-generations, fathers, sons, uncles, all lost on that boat. They rescued some people. The people they rescued were also lost on that terrible storm. And this takes you, we're getting close to the end now, towards Land's End. Porthcurno, some absolutely gorgeous beaches. But one of the most memorable things I can experience here is around about where you can see these people in the surf. There were basking sharks. You could look down from the cliff and see the basking sharks. They were about 8 meters long. The mouth was wide open, filtering planktons and things. The tail was out and the dorsal fin was out. And there were about 25 in that bay that day. They migrated their way up to Scotland. And they had a sign on the beach saying, "Please do not swim with the sharks." They are harmless, but a whack from the tail probably wouldn't be very good. But what it's also famous for is something called the Minnock Theatre. Now, the theatre is there, and it's looking out at the beach there. But it was somebody's private house, a lady called Rowena Cade, and in the 1930s, she decided that she would build the theatre in her garden, and there's steps and a viewing area, and the stage cut into the rock below, and they now have 200 performances a year. So you can imagine being there in the middle of summer for Midsummer Night's Dream, because Shakespeare companies come down there and they do these performances. And she built it herself and with friends, gardeners, local people across quite a number of years. And you can also imagine how isolated Cornwall was at that time. You know, there weren't any good roads and no railways close by. But she did it not to make money, she just did it because she thought there ought to be a theatre there, and over the years it's now become more popular. And she died at the age of 89. So she lived there all that time. So now, coming pretty much to the end, I'm standing looking out at Land's End, and in the background are the Longships lighthouse. So that's again a lighthouse offshore, warning ships coming into that stretch of the coast, very rocky stretch of the coast. So that covers the first half of the talk, of the pathway. Just a few interesting factual things. They did a study back in 2003, so we're now, not far off a quarter of a century ago. And at that stage, it was generating about 6 billion rand. I put it into rand, 6 billion rand a year of income that would not have been there if the path didn't exist. And it was supporting about 7,500 full-time jobs. By 2019, they were generating about 17.5 billion a year, number of 10,500 full-time jobs, lots of part-time jobs, people employed in cafes, and they looked at everything. They looked at people hiring bikes, people staying, guest houses, cafes, gift shops. It was a very two robust studies. They used something called the Oxford model to do this, and estimated that about 10 billion rand had been added to the economy that would not have otherwise been there if it hadn't been for the path. So it's a good model, actually. I've had talks with somebody in the wilderness area about whether the old railway line, if it's not going to be reopened, whether they've reopened that, could make something of it. And this is the kind of revenue, for only keep people safe, of course, that you could bring in from people walking, cycling, if you put a cycle track along. Here's some interesting price information. Again, I've put it into rand. 1984, we were looking at 150 rand for a bed and breakfast. But by the time we got to 2015, you needed 220 rand for a pub meal. And having just been back to the UK last year, I can tell you it's considerably larger amounts than that. The pint of beer that was a mere 14 rand then had got up to 70. and now you're looking at about 120. And very good value it is too, I have to tell you. I have no problem with that. So I'll finish with a quote. I don't know whether anybody has read The Salt Path. Yes. Okay. I think it's a wonderful book. It's a true story, very moving. The film, if you get the chance to see the film, is fabulous. The scenery is amazing, and the casting of characters have been done really, really well. It was released last month. I saw it in George last month. So if you can get hold of that, I think get to see it. I really recommend it. So there you are. The Southwest Coast Path is more than just a path. It's a transformative landscape, both challenging, healing, and available to all. So in my 30-year love affair, I think back to some of the things that I would never have seen, not only the people I met, but things like those basking sharks, the fireflies. Walking back from a pub one night at